Welcome to the NBA 2K G League show. I'm your host, Varun Chari, and welcome to the show. So, we are going to talk about the Rip City remix, their off-season guide, and pretty much just really talk about, what is in store for the remix this upcoming season. Now, it is obviously the off-season, so we don't fully know yet who's going to be where, who's going to be playing for sure, but I've always think about questions kind of going into the upcoming season. So, I think the most important thing is the drafting of Yang Hansen, and how does that change the Rip City remix moving forward? Well, obviously, let's just kind of talk a little bit about Yang Hansen. So Yang Hansen, he's a player from China, very young. People are saying he's kind of like the next Nikola Jokic. I think with Yang Hansen, he's definitely a project type of player that you hope will get reps in the G League this year, and I think Joe Cronin pretty much said that when they drafted him. He's going to be spending a lot of time with the Rip City remix. And so you have to figure out a way to kind of put him in a good spot where he can really flourish the best. I mean, kind of like Nikola Jokic, if he has that type of similar game, like where he's a very great passer, can make good reads, has good touch around the rim, he can definitely do a lot of those things. And it's about getting those pieces around Yang Hansen moving forward. And I think that's just key. And so, if you look at, for example, the OKC Thunder, you looked at during the years they were kind of in their rebuild, they were finding guys who could work next to Shea and Jalen Williams, like Aaron Wiggins, Lou Dort. I know Lou Dort's been there for quite some time, but Jalen Williams, they've been looking for guys who could really help that young core. And I think the way I think about it is, when you look for two-way signings, you look for that last two-way spot. First of all, let's just talk really quickly about their two-way signings, actually. So their two-way signings right now are Caleb Love and CD Sissoko. So they do have a third two-way spot open. And so having those two ways is important, because I think you try to look for who in the future could be to help this Trailblazers future. If Yang Hansen really ends up becoming an all-star caliber player, becomes a phenomenal player for the Trailblazers future, you look for guys who potentially could help be part of that future with the Rip City remix. And so that's something I'm being really curious about, finding guys who can really shoot the ball really well, who can really defend the ball super well, maybe next to Yang Hansen. I think that is probably his weakness for Hansen, is that he's not a great defender, but obviously offensively he's very good. And so that's also, I think, the conditioning. I think that's something too that I noticed watching his film over the summer. That was something he's going to have to continue to keep getting better at. And hopefully now that he's had an off season with the NBA side, he'll definitely be very good moving forward into the NBA and the G League season. But I think those are the key things you have to keep in mind with the remix. I also think, two of your guys that are affiliate players that we do need to talk about is Sean Padula from Ole Miss and Andrew Carr, who I think he went to Kentucky as well. So Sean Padula, he's a great point guard. He can really attack the rim. He can really score. He's a great three-point shooter. And he kind of reminds me a little bit of Trey Burke in some ways. And I really do like his game. And Andrew Carr, I also like about Andrew Carr is that he can stretch the floor. He's not maybe not the strongest, but he can at least move around well. Where I think I'd be curious to see how he looks next to Yang Hansen with the remix. So these are two guys who are definitely fighting for that last two-way contract spot. And as of at least the recording of this video, they still have two more affiliate player spots. So they could go and sign a guy who's undrafted in the draft this year, or they can go after and get maybe a former NBA player who doesn't have G League rights that they could target for the remix, but also hopefully for Trailblazers. So those are some important things moving forward. Their new head coach, Jonah Herscu. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing. He's been an assistant coach with the Trailblazers over the years. I think he was hired in 2022. He was also an assistant coach with the Sacramento Kings, and actually was an assistant coach with the Fort Wayne Madons, I think back in the 2010s, a decade. So he's been around the NBA and G League for quite some time, and so it's pretty cool to see him get a head coaching ability, and so I think that's great for him. This is going to be the third head coach for the remix in the past 3 years. No, it is I am curious, like why not keep more consistency? Obviously, guys do get hired and go to NBA teams. Last year I believe the assistant GM of the Trailblazers, I think was it Sergi Olivali, or I know I'm mispronouncing it, but I think he was the head coach of the Rip City Remix, and then I don't know if he's now returned back to Portland, back in the front office role. Look, I'm excited to see how Jonah does as a head coach. How he really works to develop Yang Hansen. I think clearly he's been around the NBA and G League for a while, so hopefully he does a good job in his first year. Let's see. Hopefully he stays around longer, maybe as a coach at Remix, because they've had so many different coaches over the years, and this is G League, so it does change every year. Cool to see if there was more consistency for the Remix, but again, it just depends on the situations for each coach. It's very different for everybody. So let's talk about some of their returning rights. Key returning rights they do own. So they still have some of the players from their expansion draft, but like for example, like Chandler Bile, all the way down to I think Quentin Rose. Those are their draft rights players. Now, those draft rights will expire this year. And remember, with the expansion draft, if you select players from that, they then get their rights extend for another 2 seasons. So that's why the Remix still technically own those guys' rights for at least one more season. I know for a fact, like Kyle Guy retired anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Like he's helping with the UVA basketball team, so it doesn't even really matter for somebody like him. But they, at least for some of those other guys, maybe if they're still potentially going to play for other G League teams, maybe they've been overseas for the past 2-3 years and now they want to come back play in the U.S., that could be an option to trade their rights. And then obviously there's some of the other guys from the 23 to 24 season, like Ashton Haggins, just an example. But then there's still guys like Taze Moore, Henry Drill, who was bought out, I remember, earlier in the season. So they still do own his rights because it was a buyout. So there is still, guys they have the rights for. Vincent Valario Badone, I think. He, I remember, was acquired in the Stanley Johnson trade from South Bay. So they technically, maybe he comes back. Again, we don't know who's going to be back yet, who they could trade for in the future. But, I think the most notable rights of some guys, I know like James Bouknight, he was with the Trailblazers during Summer League, so I'd be curious to see if he comes back. Also, I know I just saw the G League, I think United team that is a team of G League players who end up going kind of like play over in Europe in a tournament called the AmeriCup tournament. I believe Sterling Manley has also been selected for that team. So I'm also curious how many of those guys, from that team will also play in the G League. But let's also talk about their draft situation. So their picks as of right now, they don't own their first and second round picks of this upcoming G League draft. Now, they own the Warriors second round pick for this year. They own the Kings second round pick. So the Warriors second round pick was the Kevin Knox trade. The second round pick from the Kings, I believe, was from the Anton Davis trade. And then they own Long Island's second round pick, which I believe might have been from maybe the David Mwaka trade, potentially, or maybe a different trade, and San Diego's 2026 second round pick. So ideally, they have a lot of picks. They can still trade for more returning rights as different guys that they want to target for the remix. Obviously, there's always tryout players too, but this could be the option to help look at some guys. You never know who in the draft could be helpful. Braxton Key was a guy that the Delaware Bluecoats drafted. He was the last pick in the G League draft, I believe, in 2021. And then got called up to the 76ers later that season. And so you never know who could end up helping you and maybe making an impact at the NBA level. That's the big thing, I think, for those NBA teams, is if you get a guy from the G League, homegrown talent who really ends up being, a good player for the 18-man roster. So I think those are important things to just keep in mind. Having draft picks, I think, is just helpful to get returning rights for guys that they really like and that they want to target, especially for guys who've been there for quite some time. And, the former NBA G League team of, that player might be more reluctant to trade them. And so being able to at least have picks to at least kind of help smooth the deal, I think, is always huge for these teams. But that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know what you think about the remix. What do you think about Yang Hansen as a prospect? Are you excited about him, the remix? Yeah, let me know in the comments down below. But if you watch this video, feel free to subscribe, like, or dislike, because hey, you do you. So this is the NBA 2K G League show. I'm your host, Rune Chara, and peace.